Hello, and welcome back to the Surfer's Library. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legend. We're kicking off summer in Season 3 with one of our all-time favorite surfers, Corky Carroll, and his autobiography, Not Done Yet. Now, if you were listening last season, you probably remember we already read a little bit from this book back on episode 20. Well, I loved it so much that I reached out to Corky and asked him if we could just go ahead and make it the full Season 3 book. And thankfully, Corky said yes. Thanks, Corky. Corky Carroll is one of the funniest, wildest, and most influential characters surfing has ever produced. From growing up in Surfside, California, to becoming a 3-time United States surfing champion and one of surfing's very first pros, Corky helped turn surfing from a little beach subculture into the worldwide phenomenon that it is today. Along the way, he starred in classic surf films like The Endless Summer and 5 Summer Stories, made people laugh everywhere he went, and built a career completely on doing things his own way. In Not Done Yet, Corky shares stories from decades of surfing, travel, contests, business adventures, media appearances, and all the craziness that came with the golden age of surfing. So settle in, because this isn't just the story of a surfer. It's the story of a true original who never stopped chasing waves, laughs, and adventure. And since we already covered chapters 1 through 3 last season, if you want to skip ahead, you can jump straight to chapter 4 around the 33-minute mark. Let's paddle out. Prelude. My name is Corky Carroll, and I'm a surfer. My parents loved me very much. This was obvious to me and everybody else who knew me as a child or when I was growing up. I was born on September 29, 1947, as Charles Curtis Carroll in Alhambra, California, a suburb of Los Angeles. My dad was Charles Chester Carroll, carrying on a long line of Charles Carrolls. He was an electrician, and my mom, Nellie, was a homemaker who had been a singer when she was younger. When I was really little, I had the colic and would make these little burping sounds all the time. Our neighbor had a dog that barked all the time, and from what I hear, it was hard to tell the difference between my burping sounds and the dog barking. His name was Corky, so, you guessed it, they nicknamed me Corky after the neighbor's barking dog. I've never gone by anything else, and probably would not respond if called by Charles. But call me Corky, and I will come, fetch, roll over, shake hands, and pretty much any other trick in the manual. Although we lived in a nice neighborhood, it was their feeling that this was not a great place to raise a kid. Even then, there was gang activity and the atmosphere was not really optimum for a peaceful and happy childhood. So when I was ready to start school, they decided to move us to the beach, and it was the best thing they ever could have done for me. Who even knows what would have become of me if we'd have stayed in the city? One thing is absolutely certain, though. My life would have unrolled much differently. Chapter 1. First Ride, 7 years old. Surfside Colony is a tiny strip of Southern California beach, just south of Seal Beach, which was lined with a few dozen weathered and battered wooden beach houses back in the 1950s. They were one step above what you would call shacks, really. Our first house was a tiny one-bedroom affair with a little loft, which was where I slept. The sound of the surf, which pounded in constantly, literally within feet of our front door and the little window above my bed, pretty much drowned out everything else. It became the soothing lullaby that put me to sleep each night and woke me early every morning. In time, I would be able to tell exactly what the surf conditions were like, the size and shape, tide and wind conditions, just by listening to the sounds it made. The surf would come to take my heart and soul, as well as become my life story. It got into my very bones and has become as much a part of me as my blood. It pulses through my veins. When it's up, I can feel the excitement rush through me like a freight train. When it's down, I get restless. Our house was B21. Next door, in B20, there was an older guy who was a surfer and whose name was Larry Conroy. He had a beautiful wooden surfboard that he kept in his backyard. I could see it through the slits in the wood fence that bordered our yards. I had wanted to try and ride it for the first few months we lived there. My dad had bought me a heavy-duty canvas air mattress to ride in the surf. I loved that thing, even though it would rub my body raw daily with its rough and abrasive surface. There were a few other kids along the beach that were my age, and we all rode those air mats together. Actually, we would ride anything we could find that would float. Old pieces of plywood with nails sticking out of them, inner tubes, whatever. One dude paddled out on a rotten old rowboat we found on the beach one day. Before he got very far from the beach, the thing just sank out from below him, which was really entertaining for the rest of us. The beach and the ocean were our playground. I could not stay out of the water. It drew me like a goddess with a magic flute. The older guys had surfboards. In those days, they were made of wood, mostly balsa wood, but some still with redwood and other wood combinations. Needless to say, they were heavy. Most of the guys just left them laying around on the beach after they surfed. Nobody was going to bother them. Larry Conroy was the best surfer on our beach, and he had the nicest surfboard. I guess that's why he kept it in his yard, right where I could see it and crave riding it. I would peer through the fence day in and day out, just wondering what it would be like to stand on top of it riding some monster wave. It sort of became an obsession after a while, like I was stalking it or something. Larry had a younger cousin named Carrie, who was my age. Carrie was really good at getting me into trouble. One day we were hanging out and I was telling him how I wished I could try that surfboard that Larry had. He kind of casually and challenging at the same time suggested that I might as well just get it over with and sneak the board out of the yard and try it out. Larry's not home. Nobody'll ever know, he urged. Come on, Corky, just do it. Did he later work for Nike? So I did. That was the day my future college career went out the window. Surfside had a little street that ran along the beach. The houses on the ocean side were A row. On the land side, they were B row. Our house was on the inland side of the street, but there were no houses directly across the street on the beach side. There was also very little beach, maybe only about 20 feet of sand and then the ocean. Carrie had to help me carry the board out of the yard, across the street, and onto the beach. It was too heavy for me to pick up by myself. We were only like 6 years old at the time, and this big wooden surfboard weighed more than both of us together. But we got it down to the water, and I made my launch. The surf was probably about 3 or 4 feet that day, although in my boy mind memory it was freaking huge, like 80 or 90 feet, maybe 100, really big. I'm really not sure how I made it out past the waves. Must have just been sheer luck. But there I was, sitting on Larry Conroy's beautiful balsa wood surfboard, outside the surf and living life large. What a beautiful feeling and beautiful view. When the waves would pick me up, I could see over the houses. There was a seafood restaurant on either side of Pacific Coast Highway, which was right behind our house, named Sam's. Sam's had a big neon fish sign on its roof, and I could see it from the board when I would float over the wave crests. This was breathtaking. But the idea was to ride this thing, not just sit there basking in the flora and fauna and enjoying the view. What I had not counted on was the current. I had floated a little bit north up the beach, and without really realizing it, I was now out in front of a couple of houses that were on A row. The front of the houses on A row were on wooden pilings, keeping them out of the water. That's how short the beach was. A large wave came along, and I decided it was time to try this out. Taking off on an air mat was one thing. You were laying down and they were floaty and full of air. On a surfboard, there was way more speed and they are long and pointed. As this mountain of water lifted me skyward, I paddled my guts out and caught it. I leapt to my feet just like I had seen the older guys do a zillion times and prepared to take the drop. What a rush! But, as often happens on people's first attempt at this, the nose of the board buried into the bottom of the wave and sprung me off like a large springboard. Boing! I remember looking straight at a house right in front of me as I was flying through the air. Uh-oh. Lucky for me, I came out of the bone-crushing wipeout unscathed, but Larry's board didn't fare so well. It had hit one of the pilings under the house and had a giant gash in one rail. I was in deep cat poo-poo. Cat poo-poo is much like doggy doo-doo, but smells worse. Conferring with Carrie, we came up with the only workable solution that seemed available at the time. We would put the board back and never say a word. This started a sort of bad pattern of behavior for me. I became obsessed with learning to ride surfboards. When the older dudes would leave their boards lying around on the beach and go home, I would sneak them out into the surf, and oftentimes would not return them in as good a condition as when I took them. Rumors ran rampant, and eventually I was busted as the bad boy board bandit of Surfside Colony. One day, all the older dudes got together and went to my dad. They told him that either I'd get my own surfboard or they were going to drown me. I'm not sure how much consideration he gave this choice, but I'm sure there was at least one or two chin-rubbing hmms involved. On Christmas morning of 1957, I woke up to find my brand new 8.7 balsa wood surfboard lying on our living room floor under the Christmas tree. It weighed 3 pounds more than I did. Perfect. Christmas time in Southern California is a lot nicer than many places in the world. But even so, it's cold. And that Christmas day was clear and very cold. Nonetheless, I had to try out my new board. It had been handmade by a guy named Dick Barrymore, who was a Los Angeles City fireman that lived in nearby Seal Beach. He made surfboards out of his garage and also surfing and skiing films as a hobby. He would later become very well known as a leading ski movie maker. My dad had asked him to make me the board. It was sort of like what a speed-shaped board would look like today, a little narrow with a pintail. That means the tail was drawn to a point at the back and is generally used on big wave boards. Why he made me this type of shape, I don't know, but I loved it. No, I adored it. The first challenge for me that morning was getting the board across the street and into the water. We had moved up the street to B44, a slightly bigger house with 3 little bedrooms. Mine had a balcony where I could hang out and watch the surf all the time. But it was still on the inland side of the street, so I had to learn how to get my board to the water without dragging it. It was too heavy for me to carry by myself. I developed the end-around-end method. I would pick up the tail and move it around to the front, and then the nose and move it around to the front, and eventually I would walk the board down to the water and get onto it and paddle out. It wasn't pretty, but it got me there and back. The actual distance from our yard to the water was probably only 50 feet at the most, but it was still a job to walk the big wooden surfboard over and back. On that Christmas morning, I was not to be denied. I got my new board into the water and launched it on its maiden surf voyage. Wearing only a pair of swimming trunks, as we had no wetsuits back then, I shivered my way out through the waves and got ready for my first ride. Lucky for me, it was very small that morning, and there was nobody else around. I spotted a clean little wave coming my way and went for it. I felt the speed of the board increase as I caught the wave and I jumped to my feet. Wow, there it was. I was standing on my board and racing down the face of the wave towards the left. My right foot was forward, making me what is called a goofy foot, so I was facing the wave. To my amazement, I didn't fall when the wave broke. I just kept going all the way to the beach and stepped off. Oh, hell yes. I was definitely going to like this. For a surfer, your first surfboard is much like your first car or your first lover. You remember every curve, every line, every detail. You remember the feel as she moved through the water, the agony of getting her first scratch, and the smell of resin the first time you patched her. I loved my first board and took great care of her. From the point on her nose to the wood-burned Barrymore hand-done label on the tail. She had a pine skeg, or surfboard fin. I rode her hard and definitely put her away wet. As time went on, surfboards were all starting to be made out of polyurethane foam, and soon, balsa wood would become a material of the past. I'm just glad I was one of the lucky ones who learned on a wooden board. Chapter 2. The Stoke. From that first Christmas morning until I was out of the house and on my own, my parents had a very hard time keeping me out of the surf. Probably something like 90% of my thoughts were centered around surfing. The other 10% was divided into the various activities of a young boy: eating, school, friends, and what was on television. I don't think my schoolwork suffered much because of my surfing, but probably my social life did to some extent. From day one, surfing took priority over just about everything else. I was lucky to live right on the beach where I could surf almost as much as I pleased. I could get up before first light and get in a good hour of surfing before catching the school bus. One of the real struggles I had with my mom was that she had been in music when she was younger and wanted me to learn to play the piano. This was probably because we had a piano. It had come with the house. She had been a singer during the days of live radio and had performed on KHJ in Los Angeles, and also had made a couple of records. They were made of tin back then. Every now and then, we would try and play one on our record player, and even though the sound was very scratchy, you could hear her and recognize her voice. She had been much younger then, as she had had me at close to 40 years old. I have an older sister, Norma, who is 20 years older than I am, and was already married with kids of her own when I was born. Nonetheless, Mom was always singing when I was a kid, and I knew the songs on her records by heart. Her brother, my Uncle Lawrence, was a classical violinist and also a jazz drummer who had had the band that played on the Great White Steamship that traveled back and forth from Long Beach Harbor to Catalina Island back in the 1940s. So, Mom wanted me to have music too, and she hired Mrs. Suppley, the wife of a local minister, to give me piano lessons. I might have gotten into it if Mrs. Suppley would have given me anything that I was interested in the way of music, to learn. But she was into classical music and insisted that is what I had to learn. I was thinking Ray Charles and she was thinking Bach. Plus, these piano lessons took place right after I got home from school, when my mind was completely focused on getting back into the surf. I resisted to the max, but Mom won out, and I was forced to have to bang my way through 30 minutes of practice every day before I could go out surfing, plus my lesson every Tuesday. Little did I know then what a solid my mom was doing for me, one that would come in handy in my post-surf years, and to this day still does. Then there was the homework issue. I was pretty good at snowing her into believing that I got all that done right after dinner and before television. Most of the time I was really hard at work, drawing surf pictures or coming up with cool color schemes for fantasy surfboards that I had in my head. Some homework must have gotten done because I kept my grades reasonable, but I don't remember putting much effort into that. Something that had a profound effect on me was seeing my first surfing movie. There were a couple of brothers who lived down the street from us named Mike and Mark DeChevreau. They were fellow Air Mat warriors with me, and also were getting into surfing at the same time I was. Their mom, Ruth, was a huge fan of the bullfights and would head down to Mexico all the time for that. She would also occasionally pile us all into the back of her station wagon and take us surfing down the coast to Doheny and San Onofre, excellent surf spots at the southern end of Orange County. One night she found out about a surfing film being shown at a little artsy kind of theater up in Hollywood and loaded us all up to go see it. The name of the movie was Surf Safari. It was filmed and narrated by a dude named John Severson, who would later go on to publish Surfer magazine. I will never forget that adrenaline rush I felt when the big wave sequence came on the screen. The music got cranked up. It was the theme from Peter Gunn by Henry Mancini, and the narration went, "On December 15th, the biggest swells to hit the Hawaiian Islands in over 50 years came marching out of the North Pacific. Only a handful of the truly hardcore were there to meet the challenge." My jaw dropped, and I was totally swept away with the enormity of this. I was stoked to the max. I had a full-blown case of surf fever, a later John Severson movie title. That did it. From then on, I went to see every surf film there was and collected every surf photo, surf poster, surf anything I could get my little hands on. All the walls of my room and the ceiling would eventually be filled with surf stuff. Surfing consumed my life. Yeah, I still played Little League baseball and all that kind of stuff, but it was surfing that became my passion. Everything else took a back seat to that. In 1959, the movie Gidget hit theaters all around the country. It was based on a real chick who had hung out at Malibu during the summers and had become a part of the surf pack there. Her father had written a book about her and the surf crew, and it became a Hollywood movie. Like everything else that had anything to do with surfing, I couldn't wait to go see it. A lot of the local surfers thought it was not very realistic, but I loved it. Some of the big-name surf stars did the surfing in it, like Mickey Dora. A dude named Mickey Munoz, who's a little guy himself, did some of the surfing for Sandra Dee, wearing a girl's two-piece bathing suit and a blonde wig. The rest was done by Linda Benson, a top female surfer in the world in those days. That movie had a huge impact on surfing. Before that, the entire surfing population in the United States consisted of a few pockets of what were considered beatniks, bohemians, and lunatics along the West Coast and in Hawaii. After the Gidget movie, all surf hell broke loose. Everybody wanted to be a surfer. America had this romantic notion that surfers were all free-spirited, party-loving nomads that didn't work and spent all their time surfing and making out with hot chicks at beach parties and in the back of their woodies. This was an image I could definitely sink my teeth into and grasp it as a workable vision to ascend to. I was as stoked as a kid could be. Chapter 3. I'm gonna be good, and I don't care what you think. With the gaining popularity of surfing came surfing publications. One day, somebody at school told me there was a surfing newspaper and that had come out and had a killer photo of 3 guys on a giant wave at Makaha, Hawaii on the cover. The word was that they had them for sale at the Ole Surf Shop in Sunset Beach, about a half-mile south of our house. When I got home, I squealed, whined, and begged my mom relentlessly until she coughed up $1. Then I jumped on my trusty Schwinn 3-speed and flew down the road as fast as my little legs could pedal. The Ole Surfboard Shop was an old Quonset hut converted into a tiny showroom in front with the entire manufacturing process done in the back. That was back in the days of real surf shops. You got blasted by the smell of resin right when you went in through the door, and normally you'd step in some and ruin your shoes at the same time, or at least get a bad case of fiberglass itch from the dust in the air from sanding the boards. It was sort of becoming a part of the whole process, I guess. Be one with your board, so to speak. When I got to the shop that day, local surf star and future legendary lifeguard Timmy Dorsey was working in the little sales area. He was one of my surfing heroes at that time, and I was happy that he was there to talk to. Little did I know then that Tim would become a lifelong friend and brother to this day. Timmy was one of the few local surf stars who had taken the time to be nice to me in the water and always had a smile and a, "Hey kid, how's it?" for me. Of course, I was probably a bit hard to bear at that time for most of them due to my zealous stoke and high energy. More on that a bit later. So Timmy sees me come in and gets this huge grin on his face. "I bet I know what you want," he said with music in his voice. My eyes lit up. There it was, sitting on the counter, the object of my desires. The first surfing newspaper complete with the classic surf shot of Peter Cole, Wally Forsyth, and George Downing screaming across this huge and beautiful wall of water at Makaha. "Yeah, the paper, the paper, the paper. I want it," I bellowed with glee. "How much money do you got?" "My mom gave me $1. Is that enough?" At first, Tim sort of winced and frowned. He was looking at the ground and kind of shaking his head. I guess he could see the light go out in my eyes. Well, I guess he kind of engineered that, actually. "Gee, kid, they want $1.50 for this thing," he said with just a touch of sympathy in his tone. My head dropped. "But for you, I'll let this one here with only a small resin drip on the corner and a light mustard stain for my sandwich go for only $1. "Really?" I came back to life. "Yep, and not only that, I want to tell you that Ole and I have been watching you surf and are impressed with what we've been seeing. You could have some potential." "Really?" My heart was soaring. Note, the price on the cover was actually 50 cents. "Yep, and Ole has authorized me to offer you a surf team deal if you want to ride an Ole surfboard." "Really?" "Yep, free color." "Free color? Oh, wow, really?" "Yep, so when do you want to order your new Team Ole board, amigo?" Before those words had finished leaving Timmy's lips, I was on my bike, slightly soiled surfing newspaper in hand, and was racing home as fast as I could go. My dad should be getting home from work at any minute, and I had some serious work to do. At that time, I had just about completely thrashed my second board. It had started out to be a candy apple red tint foam board made by the same Dick Barrymore who had made my first balsa wood board. The wood board had lasted me about 1.5 years, and then I had to have one of the new foam boards. It was the thing, lighter and more maneuverable. I was about 1.5 years into my candy apple red Barrymore, which was now a weird faded yellow-brown kind of color, and it was so full of dings and patches that the original lightweight red beauty had turned into a heavy, sluggish eyesore. Even my dad could see that. I have to say that both my parents were always behind my surfing and did all they could to support me. When I told my dad about the surf team deal, his eyebrows went up. "Free color? That's a good deal?" he smiled. Yeah, Dad, amazing deal. Ole and Timmy Dorsey himself think I have potential. Come on, Dad, please. This conversation went on for about a month until he finally caved in and agreed to buy me the board. But I had to pay him back half of what it cost for my paper route. I think the free color price was $80, so I owed him $40. This was sort of the beginning of him trying to teach me the value of things. The day I ordered my first Ole still stands out in my dimly lit memory banks. Tim and I went over a few different color combinations, and it was an agonizing process. A friend of mine who started surfing about the same time as I did, named Terry Odell, had a board with a topless mermaid painted on the nose, which I thought was extremely cool. But my mom might not like that. After a while, I finally settled on 3 color panels: green, white, and red. Tim pointed out that this would look like a big Mexican flag. Well, then I can yell, "Ole!" on my Oli, I announced. This was like a strange omen for things to come later in both of our lives, which I'll get into when I get to that part of this story. One of my fondest memories of that first Ole board was the day when I went surfing in front of our house and there was a high tide running. As I mentioned earlier, the houses on the ocean side of the street were on pilings, and at the high tide, the surf actually went under the houses, kind of like the houses were on little piers or something. Across the street from our house was a single-story home owned by Mr. and Mrs. Cray. Just to the south of their house was a break of about 6 lots until the next house was on pilings, which was owned by the Hendershots. On this particular day, I was riding a wave and came into the shore break right between the 2 houses. Just as the wave closed out near the sand, I did what was called a flyaway kickout. This is where you launch your board towards the sky to get yourself out of the wave. When I came up, I looked all around me and I could not find my board. My dad was standing on the street watching me at the time. He was a short and stocky kind of dude with curly hair and blue eyes. He loved to fish, but he never learned to swim. He was standing there with a kind of pissed off look on his face. "Hey, Dad, did you see where my board went?" I called out. He pointed towards the Cray's house. Uh-oh. There was my board sticking out of the Cray's kitchen window. I had launched it so high that it cleared their porch railing and went right through the glass window and into their kitchen sink. Only the tail end was sticking out. Oops. Being a team rider of sorts definitely bolstered my fresh, young, and growing surf ego and made me even more convinced than I had been before that I was going to surf and surf and surf and one day become a surf star like Timmy Dorsey and the guys who I'd seen in the surf movies and in that mustard-stained surfing newspaper. My little mind had begun to focus itself like it had no other purpose. When I saw somebody who surfed better than I did, I would watch them and try to copy some aspect of their surfing that I liked. A turn or a cutback or the way they held their arms. One day I'll never forget was when I saw Robert August surf in front of my house. He was wearing white trunks and had a light blue board. I thought that was totally cool looking and was thinking about painting my board light blue. About then, I saw one of Bud Brown's surf movies and it flipped out over the surfing of Phil Edwards and Dewey Weber. Phil was ultra casual and Dewey was ultra radical. I wanted to surf like Phil, but look like Dewey. He had worn white trunks and had a red board in the movie, so then I wanted to paint my board red. The farthest I got was to take an old pair of my dad's white clam diggers and cut them off just above the knees. They had a couple of blue stripes down the sides of the legs, which I thought was cool. This made a sort of baggy-looking kind of surf trunks. Once clad in my white baggies, I set out to try and surf like a sort of makeshift Phil Edwards-Dewey Weber combo, 2 opposites. I think what I got was an over-exaggerated, arm-waving, non-stop motor-mouth surfing Energizer bunny. When the hot local guys would show up to surf in front of my house, which was really the best spot in our local area, I would be all over them like a sand flea on a beach dog. "Hey, you guys, gonna go out? Huh? Huh? Wow, it's really looking good." It was horrible. "Hey, I'll meet you out there. I want to show you my new monster Dewey Weber drop knee cutback and really cool Phil Edwards head bobble." "Wow," I would babble. Usually, by the time I changed and grabbed my board from the backyard, they had driven away in haste. But sometimes they would go out, and I probably bugged the heck out of them. I wanted to be good, and I really didn't care who knew it or what they thought about it. Then came the day that the first issue of Surfer magazine came out. I was at school when I found out about it. A pal of mine named Greg Hector had one. Everybody was trying to get a look at it during lunch. Greg told me that Robert August had 10 of them for sale, and I had better get over to Robert's house right after school if I wanted to get one. Same deal as with the newspaper. I got home and begged and pleaded with my mom to give me the $1.50 that the magazine cost. But she only had a $5 bill and told me that I had to bring home the change. No problemo, mama. I jumped on the trusty 3-speed Schwinn and raced the mile or so over to Robert August's mint green house on 13th Street and Seal Way in Seal Beach. I did not want to miss out on getting my copy. When I knocked on the door, Robert's dad, the legendary Blackie August, answered the door. Blackie was one of the real surf dudes from the early days of wooden boards. Wow, Blackie August. Wowie, wowie, I stammered. Blackie just smiled and looked at me. Is Robert home? I managed to spit out. Yeah, he's down the hall in his room jacking off, Blackie said with a wave towards a slightly ajar door down the hallway. Jacking off? Was he serious or just joking? Geez, did I dare go down there? Yes, I wanted my Surfer magazine. Besides, Blackie had to be kidding, right? Wrong. I sheepishly knocked on Robert's door and kind of peeked in at the same time. Ah, man, there was Robert jacking off. I was living the Southwest Airlines commercial. Want to get away? What do you want, Carroll? Robert bellowed while pulling up his, yes, white surf trunks. I want to buy a Surfer magazine, that's all. You got any money? Yeah, my mom gave me $5, but I have to take home the change. Change? There is no change, you punk. They cost $5. But it says $1.50 on the cover, Robert. Well, that's before shipping and handling charges and my commission. If you want one, it's $5. Take it or leave it. Naturally, I took it. I did get my mother's money's worth, though. I have to admit that I read that magazine over and over and looked at those photos until my eyes must have faded them half off the pages. I had every photo in my mind, every caption, every word in every ad on every page. Thinking back, that magazine must have originally been a promotion for John Severson's next surfing movie, Surf Fever, because all the photos were from the film. Maybe he had intended it to be a program, but it had grown into a magazine, so he decided to release it as one. In any case, it was a good move. Before long, Surfer magazine would become the official Bible of surfing. Chapter 4. Competition in Pre-Pro Years. The first big surfing competition in California in what is called the modern era of surfing, starting the late 1950s with the advent of the polyurethane foam surfboards. It was the West Coast Surfing Championships held at the Huntington Beach Pier in September of 1959. I was 11 years old. I got my dad to take me down there so I could surf the junior men's division, which was 17 and under. The surf was pretty big that weekend, and I was pretty scared. There were 6 surfers in my heat, and they were all 16 or 17, and they all were confident and cool looking. I managed to take third in the heat. Not good enough to advance, but good enough to give me a little boost of encouragement. The highlight of the weekend for me was sitting on the pier all day Sunday and watching all the big-name surf stars competing right there in front of my very eyes. The big winner was Jack Haley, one of our local surf heroes from Seal Beach. After it was over, we saw Jack in the parking lot getting into his car, and I went over to say congratulations. He was very humble about it and surprised me by saying he had seen my heat and that I looked pretty good. To stick with it, and one day I would win a trophy. Win a trophy? Wow, what a concept that was. This was right before the offer for the team deal-free color from Timmy Dorsey and Ole. After that event, many smaller surfing competitions started happening all up and down the West Coast. By hook, crook, or even hitchhiking, I managed to enter and surf in every one of them. I never got past the first round, though. Nonetheless, I was not deterred. One day I was going to take home a trophy. Jack Haley had told me so, and I fully bought into it. I was probably the only person who knew this beyond any shadow of a doubt. I surfed morning, noon, and night. It didn't matter what the conditions were, I surfed it. I'm sure I rode more junky, terrible waves than anybody else had up to that point. The surf in front of my house was good in the mornings and horrible and windy in the afternoons. Sometimes it had good form, but most of the time it didn't. I got to where I could tell what the surf was like without even opening my eyes in the morning. I could tell by the sound and the feel of the vibrations on my bed and wall next to my bed. To actually see it, I had to open my eyes and lift my head a few inches to look out the window. The one sound I dreaded and never wanted to hear was the foghorn, that horrible low drone. Ooh, ooh. It meant that it was foggy. Fog was like the worst condition. No matter how the surf was, it didn't matter because you could not see anything. You could ride bad waves, deal with wind and rain, big or small, but fog was a real dilemma. I could not hear the sound of fog. Living next to the Navy base at Seal Beach had the extra added advantage that they had a very powerful foghorn to warn the ships that they were near the jetties that bordered the harbor. My second team deal came about a year and a half later when a guy named Larry Weiss, aka The Crow, opened a small shop in the back of the boat cover building that was across Pacific Coast Highway behind my house. Crow was one of those dudes that looked exactly like his nickname. He had black hair and a big hairy black beard and mustache. The rumor was that he was a great surfboard shaper. He had a guy working for him named Roy Crump. Roy had become one of the more or less locals who hung out and surfed near my house. Down the street, there was a big old wooden water tower. It was right at the end of our private beach colony and sort of was the border between Surfside and Sunset Beach. It was legal to park on the road in Sunset Beach, so Water Tower was pretty much the local surf spot. The surf was usually better the block up in front of my house, but most of the surf traffic was in front of the water tower. Roy was part of a group of guys who had come down from Long Beach to surf at the water tower a lot of the time. Usually I'd go surf in front of my house early in the morning before anybody got there, and then after breakfast walk down to water tower to surf and hang out with the crew. I was in need of other surfers to talk to in those days. I do vividly remember one morning down at the water tower when things did not go so well for me in that department. Robert August had shown up along with Bill Fury. Robert was the hot kid in the Seal Beach area, and so was Fury. They were about 4 years older than me and already had reputations for their surfing skills. Fury had just come out of the water with his brand new Dewey Weber board, and I asked him if I could try it. He was always really cool and said sure, so I paddled it out and caught a few waves on it. I was riding an 8.2 at the time, and Bill's board was maybe 9.6. When I came in, I commented that it felt like a great board, but I wasn't used to riding one so long. Robert August, as sarcastic as they come, loudly says to me and the whole beach, "Nah, Carroll, you're just too shitty to ride it." What had just happened? Robert August, the Robert August, had just rudely insulted my surfing in front of everybody. I didn't know what to say. I was in shock. So I took my board and sadly walked home. My mom saw the look on my face and asked me what had happened. There might have been a tear or two involved. I just told her I had a bad day surfing and left it at that for the moment. This little bit of cruelty stuck with me, and I vowed to one day get my revenge on freaking Robert August. Or maybe it was payback for interrupting him in the heat of the moment. One day I walked over to check out this new Crow surfboard shop, and Roy was there. He introduced me to the Crow. Crow told me that he wanted me to help him get all the locals riding his boards and offered me pretty much the same deal as Timmy Dorsey had for Oli. However, in this case, I could also have any sort of stringer arrangement I wanted as well as color. Stringers are the wood strips that go down the surfboard for strength. It cost a lot more to have a board with more than one stringer, and it looked very cool. So once again, I was off to make the deal with my dad so I could order my new Crow surfboard. I went way overboard on that one. I ordered it with 10 stringers in all sorts of pastel colors. In those days, the color was mostly done with pigments in the final gloss coat, and it made the board heavier. 10 stringers had already made it very heavy, and when all the color was added, what I wound up with was a very wild-looking board that weighed as much as a small barge. It did do one thing for my surfing, though. It smoothed me out a little bit. It was hard to turn with all that weight. One day, when I was over there seeing if my new board was done yet, did I mention it took about 4 months for it to be finished? I decided to stop into the boat cover shop. The guy who owned it was a dude named Walter Caton. Walter wore a captain's hat, had a beard, and sort of looked like a Jolly Roger kind of seaman. You expected a parrot on his shoulder or something. At that time, there was no surfwear industry. There was basically no surfwear. T-shirts with a surfboard maker's logos was about it. Maybe surf club jackets and sweatshirts. There were a couple of custom surf trunk businesses in Hawaii. One was M. Nee out at Makaha, and the other was Take in Waikiki. In California, there wasn't much. John Wilkes' mom made a few for him and his pals in Laguna Beach. So I decided to ask Walter Caton if he could make me a custom pair of surf trunks. Walt said he could make anything and asked me to do a drawing of what surf trunks should look like. The best I had was a sort of version of the cut-off clam diggers that I had been wearing, longer than swim trunks and with a lace up front. This was before Velcro. Walter's wife Nancy measured me, and about a week later I had my first pair of Canvas by Caton custom surf trunks. It was their first pair, too. They fit me perfectly and looked great. Red canvas. The only problem was that the boat canvas is very heavy and stiff. They weighed a ton when wet and were so stiff they could stand up by themselves when you weren't wearing them. They also gave me a horrible rash. So I went back to Walter and told him these were great, but that the canvas was too heavy and stiff. He said they had a softer cotton material that I think Nancy was going to make some curtains for their boat out of. It was called shark skin, and it was white. So they made me another pair out of that, and they were fantastic. Everybody wanted to know where I got them. I sent them all over to the boat cover shop to order their own custom-made surf trunks. Soon, Walter and Nancy were making way more surf trunks than boat covers and put up a Canvas by Caton custom surf trunk sign over the front door. They eventually became the largest custom surf trunks company in the world. I could always get a free pair. One day, we had a huge swell and some dude lost his board into the rocks near the jetty at the north end of the beach. It was a balsa wood Hobie, and it was getting thrashed. The dude was afraid to go down into the rocks to get it. I asked him what he was going to do with it, and he said it was worthless now and wasn't worth risking his life to retrieve. I asked him if I could have it if I went and got it. He said he didn't care, and if I wanted to die in the crab-covered rocks with monster shorebreak pounders crashing into them, it was cool with him. That was the last I ever saw of that dude. I have no idea who he was. I hung out for a while and waited for the tide to go down. When it did and the waves stopped pounding into the rocks, I went down and got what was left of the board. Here in my hot little kid hands was the chance to actually build my own board. I could strip off the old fiberglass, let the wood dry out, and then reshape it into a new board. A cue and angels singing and hallelujahs Corky board. I was giddy with glee and had visions of this perfect and beautiful work of art and craftsmanship that would shock and impress all my friends and burst me onto the scene as a surfboard builder. Never mind that I was not old enough for a woodshop class at school yet, nor did I have any idea whatsoever on how to shape and fiberglass a surfboard. I would figure it out. So I scrounged around for a couple of old sawhorses and got a small hand planer out of my dad's toolbox and went to work on my creation. The shape did not come out all that bad either. It was 7 feet 10 inches long, and in retrospect resembled what a speed shape would have looked like, say for small surf in Hawaii around the early 1970s. The fiberglassing was a whole nother story. I only knew how to use fiberglass to patch small dings in my boards. To actually glass a whole board was beyond me, so I did it in parts. I glassed a third of the bottom, then another, and then the other. Then did the same thing with the top. Not having a power sander did not help either. I tried to hand sand the thing, which was rampant with sharp edges, but didn't do even close to a good job. Finally, I put about 6 gloss coats over the top in order to cover up all the edges and bumps. I had fiberglass itch for years after making that board. But the all-time best mistake I made was putting on the fin. I didn't know how to keep it standing up straight while I was attaching it to the board with resin. The best plan I could come up with was to put 2 bricks on each side of it to hold it in place while the resin was drying. I did this one night and had visions of taking it out for its maiden voyage the next morning. But when I went to get it ready to surf, the fin fell off and the bricks were stuck solid to the board instead. This made my pal Steve Rowe, who was with me that morning, very happy. He laughed so hard he cried. I just cried without the laughing. It was sad, yet when looking back, extremely funny moment. How do you think it'll surf with bricks instead of a fin? Eventually, I got the bricks off and the fin on and surfed the board. It worked pretty well, even though the glass job was so ugly and bad that it was far from the amazing work of surf art that I had originally envisioned. The upside was that, one way or another, my days of surfboard and surfwear design had sprouted their early roots. As I mentioned earlier, I was doing my best to surf in every big or little surfing competition I could find. I would see all the top surfers and watch them intently. I was a student of surfing, and surf contests were the classroom. My front yard was the study hall. There was not much else on my mind until I met Teresa Thompson. Teresa became my first real girlfriend. We met in 7th grade when we sat next to each other in class. But it wasn't until her family moved to Dana Point later in the year that we actually got close. I used to ride the Greyhound bus down there to visit her on the weekends. It was during those visits that I fell in love with the Dana Point and San Clemente area, South County. Dana Point had a beautiful cove, which I had surfed a couple of times on surf safaris in the back of my dad's pickup truck or with Miss DeChevereaux and her sons. Teresa and I would walk from the cove south to Doheny State Park on little trails through the rocks and tide pools. It was very romantic. At Doheny, the surf was always good in the afternoons due to the fact the winds would come across Dana Point and blow offshore at Doheny. All the hot surfers in the area would be there every afternoon. Teresa's best friend was Marianne Harrison, the daughter of legendary waterman Lauren Harrison. One day when we were down there, Marianne introduced me to mega surfing star Mickey Munoz. Mickey was very nice and seemed to have this constant smile and laugh going on. I liked him right off the bat. Years later, we talked about that meeting, and he never remembers it, but I did. It was also on one of my surf romance trips to visit Teresa and surf Doheny that I met Mike Doyle. Mike was already a superstar in all the movies and magazines. I was hitchhiking home due to the fact that I had spent my bus money on buying lunch for Teresa and was standing on Pacific Coast Highway in front of the entrance to Doheny when Mike came driving by and picked me up. I could not even believe I was getting a ride from one of the most famous surfers in the world. I jumped into the passenger seat and bellowed out, "Oh my God, Mike Doyle!" He got this look on his face that said, "Uh-oh, maybe this wasn't such a good idea." For the next hour, I talked his ear off. Years later, talking about this first meeting, he did remember it. He said it was the reason he quit picking up hitchhiking surfers unless they were chicks. 1962 was an extreme year of change for me. I got my first total surfboard sponsorship from Richard Harbor of Harbor Surfboards in Seal Beach early that year. Rich was just getting going making boards, but his shapes had already become popular with the locals in the area. He was the first to offer me free boards to surf for him. Rich was a tall dude who surfed himself and was a fellow goofyfoot like myself. Besides making me a very fine surfboard, Rich took me surfing at Cotton's Point for the first time. It was the beginning of a long-time love affair between myself and that surf spot. From the first wave I rode there, I had this feeling that God had designed that surf spot with me in mind. It was thick and powerful and was a fairly perfectly shaped left. Not a point break as much as what you would call a reef break. The bottom is made up of round river rocks that came from the San Mateo Creek just to the south. That area is known for its series of amazing surfing spots, starting with Cotton's Point at the north and including Upper and Lower Trestles, Church, and San Onofre Surf Beach at the south. There's something very special about that stretch of beaches, a wave quality not found in many areas, and certainly one of the very best on the California coast. Rich made me a very beautiful purple and white 8.6 that I absolutely loved. I had a pair of white surf trunks that the Catons had made for me that had 4 dark blue strips going down the sides of the legs. The combo of the board and trunks gave me a very cool kind of look. It was sort of like the first time you have a set of clothes that you really feel like you look good in, even if you don't. It makes you feel cool. Well, that board and trunks combo made me feel cool, and maybe it also made me surf better because I was feeling cool. Whatever the case, in the summer of 1962, I won my first surfing contest on that board and in those trunks. It was the San Clemente Surfcapades, and I won the junior men's under 18 division. I was 14. Not only was it my first contest win, it was also the first time I had ever even won my preliminary heat, much less the whole contest. To say I was happy about this would not even come close to describing the way I was feeling when they announced my name as the winner. I was in surf Grammy heaven. All these big-name surf dudes came up and congratulated me, including Mike Doyle and Mickey Munoz, and said I surfed really well. What an amazing day. Rich Harbor had driven me to the contest along with another hot young surfer from Seal Beach named Danny Lenahan. Danny was also riding a harbor board and had taken third place. We were happy kids on that ride home. I remember that I had Rich let me off down at the end of our street by the big water tower so I could show all of our neighbors my trophy on the way home. I was one proud puppy. Winning that first contest pretty much changed my life. All of a sudden, I was at least semi-known. I started winning most of all the small contests up and down the coast in the junior men's division and some of the club contests where there were no divisions. I now had the confidence that I could win, and that made the real difference. When you can actually do something for the first time and realize that you can do that, it makes you think about it differently. Also, it was the first time my picture was in Surfer magazine. It was in an ad for Harbor that featured myself and Richard Chew. The groundwork for my surfing career was now being laid. In early 1963, Hobie bought out Ole surfboards and opened an Ole shop on Bay Boulevard in Seal Beach. It was in the downstairs part of my pal Scott Hoxson's house. Hobie was the biggest and most respected surfboard builder in the world. He hired Mickey Munoz to manage the shop and run Ole surfboards. The first thing Mickey did was recruit me to surf on an Ole. That was one of those bittersweet, agonizing moments in my surf career that I always remembered. I really liked Richard Harbor, and he had been very good to me while I rode his boards. But he was small and local, and Hobie was the big time. Mickey talked to my parents and convinced them and me that being under the Hobie umbrella would mean huge benefits to my surfing career. It's kind of funny looking back at that now. There was no such thing as a professional surfer then, but nonetheless, I was positive that I was going to be one. And going with Hobie seemed like the best decision for that very reason. But it was sad for me too. I kind of felt like I was breaking up with the nice homely girl in favor of the hot flashy one. Of course, it proved to be the right thing in the long run, and my career was put into a higher gear right off the bat. Rich went on to become a master shaper and surfboard builder who was respected the world over for his quality work, still making boards to this day. But at that moment, at that crossroads, I had to go with Hobie even though it was a really gut-wrenching thing to do. Mickey became my mentor and took me to all the surfing events. He got me into paddleboard races that I had never considered before. I was good at it and won all the races. This, in fact, helped my surfing and my competitive success. The guy who catches the best waves usually wins. That fact is still in effect today for the most part. Mickey took me to Malibu and introduced me to all sorts of great people in the surfing world. He also took care of me and was real big on right and wrong and telling me to shut up when I needed it. My favorite part of hanging out with him was his great laugh and sense of humor. I loved that. I would have loved to have been a stand-up comedian if surfing hadn't taken me first. I had a sense of humor too. Unfortunately, some people didn't get that and would take some things seriously that I had said in jest. My reaction was typical for a punk surfer. Hey, if they can't take a joke, fuck 'em. Obviously, I had not yet learned the meaning of diplomacy and also, in fact, maybe I never did get that part right. But I really loved to laugh, and a good joke was like breathing fresh air. It makes me feel good to laugh, and I always took that road if I had the choice. Even in anger, I would rather find a way to diffuse it by some sort of humor than let it get to me. My beautiful wife, Raquel, hates that. If she gets mad at me for something and I make a joke, she gets even madder. I have had to learn when and when not to inject humor, and it's taken a lot of years and mistakes along the way to have learned that lesson. If I have learned that lesson. Said with a smirk and laughing. Ha ha ha. It was on one of the surf trips up to Malibu with Mickey Munoz that I first met the infamous bad boy of surfing, Mickey Dora. The Munoz Mickey introduced me to the Dora Mickey while we were sitting in the lineup waiting for a wave. He gave me a smile and a, "Hey kid." That was pretty much it. When I got out of the water, I sat on the beach and watched them both surf for quite a while. These were two of the best surfers on the coast, and this was their spot. I was soaking it all in like a sponge. When Dora came out of the water, I walked up to him and said something kiss-ass like, "Wow, man, you are really tearing the place apart." He looked at me with a big, charismatic smile and said, "Thanks, kid. Hey, can I use your towel a minute?" I had my towel wrapped around my shoulders and immediately said, "Sure," and handed it to him. At that point, he blew his nose into it, looked down at it for a moment, then handed it back with a, "Thanks, kid." He then walked off without another word. I was standing there looking at my snot-filled towel, wondering seriously if I should either throw it away or mount it on my wall. Mickey Munoz also had a huge impact on my surfing and success in competition. He showed me how to go faster on a board. Speed equals momentum and power, which in turn opens up the door for bigger and more fluid maneuvers. My surfing got better and smoother when I learned how to go faster. Phil Edwards and I started to surf together a little bit about the same time, and Mickey suggested that Phil make me a board. He built me this huge 10-foot, 7-inch speedboard that weighed a ton and was nearly impossible to turn. He told me if I rode that board for a whole summer, it would smooth me out and make me a better surfer. I remember he said that I spent too much time riding the board and not the wave, and that this board would go a long way to helping me learn the difference. Well, if going straight and never turning makes you smoother, it did its job. I became much better at going as fast as possible between point A and point B. Plus, you look a lot smoother when you're standing in one position and never turning. I was, however, really glad when that lesson was learned and I got to get a smaller board that would actually turn and nose ride. I did come off that board a better surfer and much more aware of riding the wave ahead of what I was trying to do with the board. Eventually, these two blended themselves together. Another thing I learned by going to contests with Mickey was strategy. He was the one who made me get a waterproof watch and time the surf conditions. Waves come in sets. By having an idea of when the best sets would come, gives you an advantage to being in the right spot at the right time. And paying attention to the results as they came down to see how the judges were scoring. What was getting the best scores and what each judge seemed to be looking for. I had never looked at it like that. I was always in the mindset to just go out there and surf as good as I could. Mickey had a much more professional approach to getting the best scores possible, and the best scores win. Many times that would not represent the guy who surfed the best or looked the best. It was who scored the most points. Think basketball or tennis, same deal. It was Mickey Munoz who taught me that. Right about the same time, I became pals with a kid from Long Beach named Mark Martinson. He was a really good up-and-coming surfer, only a year older than me and super fun to hang out with. Mark had also been on hand that day at Water Tower when Robert August had shamed me in front of everybody. I often mentioned to him that one day I was gonna get him back for that. Mark loved Mad Magazine and had the humor to go along with it. His mom used to drop him off at our house to spend weekends a lot of the time. Then, when he got his driver's license, she would let him take her car to go out in. This opened up a huge new world of hitting parties up and down the coast. South Bay was a major spot, and we used to hit it up there on any given Friday or Saturday night. My favorite story from these adventures was when we had taken a couple of dates to a party in Redondo Beach and had stopped to park someplace along the way home. Mark's date must have had a bit too much to drink, because she barfed all over Mark in the back seat of his mom's car. Not knowing what else to do, we got a hose and washed out the back seat. It was pretty gross. The next day, when Mark's mom wanted to know why her back seat was all wet, Mark very calmly and in sincere and earnest tones told her that we had gone down to check out the surf at Power Plant in Seal Beach, and a wave had broken over the car while we were standing on the jetty looking at the waves. He explained that we had accidentally left the back door open, and that's why only the back seat was wet. The amazing part about this story is that she bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Mark and I would share all kinds of adventures through the years, and he remains one of my best friends and favorite people to this day. And that is going to do it for our first episode of Season 3. Summer is officially on, and we kicked it off in style with chapters 1 through 4 of Corky Carroll's autobiography, Not Done Yet. Thanks again for hanging out with me here at the Surfers Library. I hope you enjoyed it. Going forward, I am going to do my best to keep each episode around 30 minutes or so, which a few of you have advised me is your preferred length of podcast, or at least preferred length of my podcast. Today we ran a bit longer because I wanted to start from the beginning, but also provide something new for those of you that had already heard chapters 1 through 3. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to follow the podcast, share it with a friend, and come back next time as we continue our journey through Corky Carroll's autobiography, Not Done Yet. If you'd like to help support the podcast, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/The Surfers Library. Your support helps cover the platform fees that keep the show going each month. Also, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast or have any story ideas or feedback, please contact us on Instagram or at thesurferslibrary@gmail.com. Until then, this is Billy Jack reminding you to keep your toes on the nose, your stoke high, and always, always, always support your local surf shop. I'll see you out in the lineup.